can see this file access, database access, access to the session, to access to the mail function. Sometimes you even get the execution of PHP code or inclusion of PHP code. And in this example, this would allow to load an arbitrary file in memory, mail it to any email address, and in the end attempt to delete the file. So if you find this somewhere in the application, you can completely control what it does, because you have control of all the properties, and all the properties are required to do what you want. So you can choose any file, because you can set the temp file property. You can choose the to of the email, the subject of the email, and yeah, most of the times files you want to steal are not writable anyway, so the unlink will just error. And you see this is implemented in the method B, so you would have to combine it with the previously found code flow transfer object that called the method B of property 2. And because you also have control about property 2, you can just tell property 2 to be an object of type operation. So to make this more clear, I will give an example. The example is pvig. Pvig is a very popular open source user tracking system. It's supposed to be very similar to Google Analytics. And I don't know about America, but in Germany it's used in many places. And all the major German political parties have installed it on their website. All the smaller banks have it installed on their website, because all the smaller banks are powered by 2 companies, and these 2 companies both use pvig. So this renders all the banks vulnerable. You will find, ironically, security companies that use pvig, like the German Safer Shopping, which is supposed to be a certificate for shops to be secure, which usually is not, they are not. And also many popular open source projects have it on their website. For example, Typo3, which is the, at least in Germany, the most prominent content management system. And in the past, kde.org and so on, they all had pvig. And a vulnerability that was unserializing user input and especially the cookie and allowed remote code execution was disclosed by me in December 2009. And now we will look at this vulnerability. And the first thing is, when you look at it now, 7 months later, you will maybe think, oh, it's old news, it's fixed. But the problem here is PHP developers always know things better. So my recommendation to remove the unserialized was ignored, how to fix it. And so what they did is they used unserialized still and just put in a blacklist. And we all know that blacklists are the most effective way to ensure security. And after looking at it again and again, and looking at the unserialized part there in detail, it was very obvious that the blacklist is ineffective. So I won't tell you how it works correctly, but if you prepare the serialized string in a special way, you can bypass all their blacklists. This means the vulnerability I disclosed 7 months ago is still exploitable. It's not yet fixed, so I will not give you the details how to manipulate. But if you can read source code and can compare pathers to blacklists, you maybe find out how to exploit it. So when you want to exploit pvig, you need, as always, a start of a pop chain. So what you do is you take the source code, take your favorite text editor or IDE, and you will just search for wake up and destruct. And when you do that with pvig, you see that there are 8 classes from the Zen framework, because pvig comes with a small subset of the Zen framework. 8 classes of the Zen framework come with wake up, 11 classes come with destruct, and 11 classes from the pvig core classes also come with destruct. So what you would do now is you would go through all the classes and check the method in detail and check what they do. I can tell you with the wake-ups, you will most of the time will see that they're either empty, unsetting some properties, calling their parents wake-up, or doing something else that is not so interesting. So we can skip wake-up most of the time. The destructors, on the other hand, do more complex things. But the thing is, I will only go into the Send framework one this time. In December, I showed that the PVIC core comes with a config object, and this config object can directly be used to write arbitrary files to the hard disk. But I will use the more complicated way now. So I did a lot of research in Send framework last year, so I already know which of the classes are usable for pop chains. So I will just tell you which one. My most the most usable one is a send log. You see, the destructor is not doing very much. The destructor just goes through all the writer's properties, and for each writer property, it will call the shutdown method. So no interesting operation, just transfer of control from one object to the other. Of course, because you unserialize this, you have full control of the writers, so you can put any object in there that you want. So the next thing you want to do is you need to scan the source code again for something that has a shutdown method. Luckily, this time you only have 6 hits inside the Send framework, and only one of them is interesting. The others are just doing completely useless things like closing a file or that was not open previously, or delete some property. So the only interesting one is the send log writer mail, and this is actually a very complicated method. What it does is it basically checks if it has events to mail, and if it has events to mail, then it will call the mail class usually and create the text section of the email, and later create the HTML section of the email. And what you don't see here, after that it will mail the mail. So what you can do here is actually you can spam anyone with any text you want, serializing and using these 2 classes I just showed you. If you just combine these 2 classes, you can send emails. But we want to have more. We want to have more control. We want to have code execution, so we continue. So what we have to do now is we have to find, for each of the properties that is usable, which is mail and layout in this case, we have to put in fitting objects. For the mail property, it's very simple because there's only the send mail class that will fit, so you just put it in there. On the other hand, there's the render method of the layout property, and the render method is in many classes of PVIC. So in 14 classes of PVIC's core, in 6 classes of the HTML peer library, and in 21 classes of the Send framework, and even in 1 PVIC plugin. So you have to log through a lot of classes, and I don't want to do that because we don't have the time. So I'll just tell you PVIC view is the most interesting one. PVIC view is actually, the render method is a large piece of code, and most of it is wrapped in try-catch blocks. So actually you can ignore nearly everything of this. And only the last line is very interesting because it uses the property smarty and calls the fetch method. And you also see that the parameter to the fetch method is the template property, so you control both. And obviously, when it's already called smarty, then it's supposed to be a smarty object. And I will go through this now faster. And it's really a smarty object you want to have in there. Because when you know smarty, you will know that smarty allows you to have templates that execute code and so on. So when you look at the fetch method, you will see that there's a lot of code, and at some point it will check if the resource is already compiled or is already in a cache. So it will call the isCompiled method, and you see down there it will call the fetch resource info, and fetch resource info will pass the resource name that you gave it with your property, And yeah, and what you see here is that the path resource name will split the resource name you give it and split it into a resource type and a resource name. And then for every resource type that is defined, it's possible to define a callback that gets called on the name. And because we have complete control of the properties of the Smarty object, we can just put in an arbitrary resource we call XPL for exploit, and we say that the callback is this, which is the Smarty class, and the evil property method. So actually, when it splits the resource name, it will take the XPL as type, and everything after that will be what it will pass to this callback. So we can execute arbitrary PHP code. And now you just need to set this together, and when you serialize that, you will get something like this down below. And yeah, when you unserialize this from within pvik, it will execute the PHP info function in this case. But by just changing what kind of code you want to execute, you can change it to whatever you like. You see in the pvik view, there's a template, a property, and you just say it's XPL for the XPL resource you just injected, double point, and then the code you want to execute. And you can put anything you want in there. So, okay, this is pvik. The problem is, I told you, like, there's some applications that unserialize user input, like WordPress, but they don't have interesting objects. So they have no destructors, no wake-ups, and so you cannot exploit them with the property-oriented programming way. You need another way. And what you need is a vulnerability in the unserialized part itself. And what I show you is a use of the free vulnerability in the SPL object storage class of PHP. And this is actually was 0 day until like 1 month ago, and 1 week ago it was fixed. So it will not work on most on the new PHP version, but no one is using the latest PHP version anyway. So the idea of the bug is that SPL object storage is an object map. So you can put objects into there and map some extra data to it. So for example, you can put 1, 2, 3 as extra data for the alpha object, and you put 4, 5, 6 for the beta object as extra data. But what you can also do is put 2 different kinds of data for the same object. So this means you first put in 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6 for the same object. What will happen is that SPL object storage will delete the old value, in this case 1, 2, 3. So why could this be a problem? A problem is because you can also inject this inside unserialize. So you can use unserialize to unserialize some SPL object storage thing and use the same object as key 2 times. You can do that by using references, or because the actual type of the variable was not checked in the previous PHP version, you could use the same integer 2 times. What will happen is that in PHP 5.3, the extra data that was previously at the same key will be deleted.